So I'm Paul Talbot from Majestic Aquariums. I've basically been in the fish keeping industry for about 22 years, and as a little kid there's nothing that I remember more than going around to my pop's house and visiting his garden. And the absolute feature of his garden was a very simple cascading pond, and in that pond was several fish that used to live in there, one of them being Jaws, that was many years old, and he was quite a large goldfish. And the amount of joy that a little fish, that a little even simple fish pond can bring yourself and the kids is really phenomenal. And I'm a big believer that no matter how nice your garden, it will be enhanced with a fish pond. The other thing that's good with a fish pond is you can often put it in positions where a lot of your plants don't want to grow so well. And I'll go through from top to bottom basically what's involved with keeping a fish pond. And the way I'm going to structure, I've got 3 seminars on today. So I've got the first one, and then the second one I'm just going to briefly outline the first one and do the second one, and then the third one I'm going to briefly outline the first and second one and do the third one. And if at any point you've got any questions whatsoever about fish keeping in general, regardless of whether you've got questions about little goldfish, fighting fish, up to sharks to corals, it doesn't matter. I have experience in everything and more than happy to get involved. So I've got a large aquarium business down at Taran Point called Majestic Aquariums, and have a very big and interactive online store. So starting out, the first point is where to put the pond. So the most important position to put the pond, as far as I'm concerned, is where you can enjoy it. The worst place to put the pond is right up the back of the yard where you rarely are. You really want it, if possible, next to a sitting area where you can sit down and enjoy your pond, because the fish that are inhabiting the pond really are pets, and the closer the pets are to the family and the more day-to-day interaction you get with your fish, the more enjoyment you'll get out of your fish and the more your fish will actually respond to you. Another thing is, try not to put your pond underneath a residual tree, because it's a real pain in the neck when you're scooping leaves out of the pond all the time. And so away from a residual tree is quite a good idea, and preferably not full sunlight. It's not the end of the world if it is full sunlight, but if there is a slightly shaded area, that's usually preferable. And another tip when you're building your pond is, if it is possible, to have raised sides in your pond. So what we don't want is your pond to be the lowest point of the yard, because you don't want all your rain and all your runoff just going straight down into the pond. It's better if you can put the pond somewhere where the water can rush straight past the pond, and if you do get a little lip on the side of the pond, just so the water can carry around the pond as opposed to in the pond. So obviously deciding where to put the pond is very important. The next thing that's important is the size of the pond. Now, I will say that I've been involved in the construction and installation of probably hundreds of ponds. And every time you basically, should we get the smaller pond? Should we get the bigger pond? Should we make it this size? And I can honestly say in 22 years, never once has anyone come back and said, "I wish the pond was smaller." You always wish the pond was bigger. So the bigger the better, but be careful with the depth of the pond, because by law you're only supposed to have, I emphasise supposed to have, 30 centimetres of water in the pond. So there are some ways of getting around that, such as putting a grid at 30 centimetres, putting big pebbles to 30 centimetres, but ultimately One, two, yes, I'm back. So if you are going to have a larger pond, you do want to consider fencing it. Like, you could make an obnoxious fence like this one, or you could make a nice glass fence. You do need to look at fencing your pond if it's deeper than 30 centimetres. The other thing that a lot of people do too is, with the big serious ponds, the actual pond itself will be the fence. So if your pond is actually coming out of the water to the point that it qualifies as a fence, then that's obviously an option. Now, the next question is what to make your pond out of. So your first option is cement. So obviously quite laboursome way of doing it. And most cement ponds to me look like cement ponds. There's very few people that can make a cement pond look extremely natural. There's a few people out there that can pull it off, but most of the time I reckon a cement pond looks like a cement pond. The next option is pond liner, and a pond liner is another thing which is very, very easy. You basically just dig a hole, you lay down your inlay, you lay down your liner, you fill it up with water, and then you try and rock it around on the outside. That's another one that I just often see not done well. So if you do a liner pond really well, you certainly can pull it off, but a lot of the liner ponds, you can really see that they're liner ponds. The next option is your preformed fiberglass, and so you can go to any hardware store, or there's lots of places that sell preformed fiberglass ponds. So you basically just dig your hole out, you put your preformed plastic ponds I'm talking about at the moment. So you put that in, and then you sort of rock around the outside. So I mean, once again, most ponds that I see that are installed as preformed plastic ponds also look like preformed plastic ponds. Your other option is fiberglass. If you're going to do something pretty fancy, it's surprisingly simple to do. It seems like a really daunting technical task, but when it comes to fiberglassing, it's actually quite easy. And if you know any boat makers or so forth that can do the fiberglassing for you, you can create really nice external formal ponds, either with Bessa brick, or you do the structure itself out of steel. And I'm building myself a shark tank at the moment, which is 6 metres long, 2 metres wide and 2 metres high with glass face. And the process has been actually quite simple. And considering the feature it is, it's actually quite cost effective. So I mean, I don't care how nice your house is, this will just blow away anything in your house. And you put a nice pond in your backyard, a well thought out pond, and I just think it's absolutely the feature. Now, the sort of pond that I'm completely biased towards is the Universal Rock ponds. So Universal Rock is a product which was invented by an Australian guy who has since moved to America to manufacture them over there because of economic reasons. But it seriously looks like a natural rock, like the actual finish of this pond is actual rock, because the way they make it is they have a mould and then they lay this latex over the mould, and then they shoot the surface of the pond with actual crushed natural rock. And if you want to see any samples of these products, I've got a display just outside the door here. So if you go outside, you can touch this product. It's very tough to touch. It's extremely durable, it's very lightweight, and it's extremely cost effective, and it looks fabulous. I mean, they've got all different designs of ponds and flow ponds and waterfalls, and they all mix perfectly, and anyone can install them. It's seriously, dig a hole, whack it in there, backfill it, then you can put your flow pond, then you can put your waterfall, and you can just create the energy that the pond actually creates, and the ambience that it just gives to the yard is absolutely beautiful. So once again, that's my favourite way of going about it. You can get even very large ones. Now the next thing we've got to consider is how to aerate the water, because if we have a hole in the ground that's full of water, that has a capacity. And what I mean by that is that if we go and put ourselves a pond in and we don't have fish, I think you're crazy, because that's a mozzie farm, and I hate mozzies. So you definitely want to have fish in your pond. So therefore, if you've got a hole in the ground with some water in it, in that capacity, you can have, let's say, a couple of fish. But then if you start to aerate the water, then you can have more fish. Then you can start to filter the water, then you can have more fish. And I'll go through, during the course of this seminar, how to transform what is otherwise just a hole in the ground with water. So how to aerate the pond. So there's various different sorts of water features that you can put in. So water features being little fountains and so forth. Anything that breaks the surface of the water is going to aerate the water, and the more we aerate the water, the happier the fish are. and the more fish we can have. So if we don't have too many fish and we don't have aeration, it's not the end of the world. But the more we can aerate that water, the more rich in oxygen it is, and the more fish we can have, and the happier the fish are. So another way that you can do it is with a creek. It's very simple to make a creek, and if you've got like a garden bed and you can have the water return at the top and run down a little creek, it looks really nice. You can get pre-formed creeks from Universal Rocks. This is a pre-formed plastic creek in this particular picture. The next option is obviously waterfalls. Now this is a Universal Rock waterfall. In real life it is absolutely spectacular. It is so beautiful to watch. And to install that waterfall, all you're basically doing is just putting the waterfall on the side of the pond and then connecting your pump outlet to the bottom, and away you go. The water just beautifully cascades down. And these waterfalls come in all different sizes to suit all different types of ponds, and you can also they're also quite popular to put on swimming pools as well, because it's just an absolute beautiful feature for a swimming pool. Another way that you can aerate your pond is by what's called surface agitation. So if you've got a pond, say that size, what you're trying to avoid is the pond being still. What you're trying to do is break up the surface of the water, and breaking up the surface of the water is going to release the CO2 and fill it up with oxygen. And that good oxygen is absolutely crucial for all the biological processes that occur in the pond. It's absolutely crucial for supplying the fish and providing all of the good bacteria that we'll talk about soon. So once again, it's very common to go to someone's pond and then they've got just a simple water feature, maybe a very simple filter, but the water itself, it hasn't got any movement. And one of the best ways of keeping your pond clean and increasing the capacity of the pond, meaning how many fish you can have in the pond, is governed by how much you can make the water move. So if you have a relatively basic pump and it's aimed at a 45-degree angle this way, you can actually turn the water around, and then once the water starts to move, it builds up what's called kinetic energy. And kinetic energy is where the movement of the water creates the movement of the water. And then you'll find that your pond stays so much cleaner because the debris doesn't just sit in the bottom of the pond. There's a much higher chance of it going into the filters, and you'll find that the fish really need to, they're just so much more alive. There's more oxygen in the water. You see them actually swimming around. Kinetic energy really brings the water alive. Another way that you can obviously aerate your pond too is with pond plants, because the process of photosynthesis is obviously going to aerate the pond during the daytime, but then photosynthesis will produce CO2 at night time. So the photosynthesis alone, though it has a huge impact on the oxygen level of the pond, you don't want to have to rely on it. Now the next thing is how to filter the pond. So basically, first of all, we started out with where do we put the pond? How big should the pond be? Then the next thing we talked about is how to aerate the pond, being with water features, creeks, waterfalls, building kinetic energy with pumps. Then the next thing is how to filter it, because basically the fish that are contained within your pond are all going to be producing organic waste, basically in the form of ammonia. And then this ammonia is broken down by bacteria into nitrite, and then another bacteria breaks the nitrite into nitrate, and that more or less happens inside your filter system. So it is, the bigger the filter that you have, the more fish you can have in the pond and the less maintenance you do. So if you go and get yourself a little filter, your fish will grow, and then before you know it, they'll grow out of the capacity of the pond or out of the capacity of the filter, and that means you need to clean it more often. It is absolutely the case. You go and get yourself a filter that's way too big, and then that's going to really give you a whole lot of compensation in, number one, the amount of stock you can have in it, and then also how often you actually have to clean it. So one of the most simple is an internal filter, and this is a very basic model. It just sits in the bottom of your pond. It sucks water in through a medium. It's also got a UV sterilizer in the back of it. Now, a UV sterilizer for a standard Australian fish pond would probably be the single most important thing that you buy, because if you have a fish pond, the fish are producing CO2, which the algae loves. The fish are producing organic waste that the algae loves. So you're basically creating yourself a circumstance where the algae is just going to thrive. So what the UV sterilizer does is the water passes through the UV sterilizer. The UV sterilizer has what's called a UVC light in it, and the UVC light is a poisonous light that's contained within this unit, and any parasites or any algae spores that pass through it are actually killed. It is important that you replace these globes probably about once a year, and that you clean the quartz sleeve on the inside to make sure the light can penetrate the water. And these things will keep your water crystal clear. So if you don't have a UV sterilizer on your pond, I would absolutely recommend it. So the different types of filters, you've got internal filter with a UV, you've got an external filter. Now the benefit of an external filter is that you can get them as big as you want. They can be very large and they're very easy to clean. You just basically take the top off, pull the media out, and you've got to make sure that any filter, the way you clean the filter is very important. The thing you never want to do is grab the hose and just hose it all out, because the hose is going to contain the bacteria, going to contain chlorine in the water that's going to kill all the good bacteria that's inside your filter. So the way you want to clean your filter is just get yourself a pail, pull a bit of water out of the fish pond, grab your media, give it a bit of a clean, and you're not trying to clean it so it's really clean. You're just trying to get most of the solid stuff out of it so the water can pass through it nicely, because you want all the good bacteria, you want all the worms in the compost heap. Then you put that back inside the filter. So these big external ones are very, very easy to clean, and they're very cheap to buy. They're not expensive, and you can put a UV sterilizer on the inlet or outlet to make sure you're getting the advantage of that as well. So the next option you've also got is a pressure filter, and a pressure filter is a quite large canister depending on the size pressure filter you buy, and normally you just bury it next to the pond, and it's got a simple inlet and outlet and a backwash. So they're very easy to clean by just switching it over to backwash and pushing a lot of the gunk out of the bottom, and then probably at least once a quarter you want to clean your filter. So most of the bigger filters, you want to aim to clean them at least once a quarter, and they do incorporate a UV sterilizer into them as well. So the water goes through this unit, the UV sterilizer is going to kill any algae spores or parasites, then the filter itself is going to grow good bacteria that's going to break the waste down, and the sponges and so forth are going to collect any solid waste that's in there. Now with these internal ones, with these filters here that have got the internal UVs, it's really important that your UV sterilizer is not running all the time when it's new, because you do need to let the good bacteria get into the actual filter itself. So if you'd say turn the UV off for a week, on for a week, or off for a day, on for a day, just to let the good bacteria get inside it, then once you know the good bacteria is inside, then by all means you can run the filter all the time. So there are various options as far as choosing the sort of filter for your pond once you've actually set it up, and it is absolutely the bigger the better. So the way these filters work are basically very simple. This is a very basic one. That's a basic internal filter, and then that sends the water up to a little creek, goes down through the creek back into the main pond again, and this particular unit could not house many fish because there's not any substantial filtration. If you wanted something that can house a bit more fish, you need to get yourself a much bigger filter. The bigger filter is going to allow more filtration, so therefore that's a similar type process. But these big, large external filters, if they're pressure filters, are often buried under the ground, so you can't actually see them. You just see that top, and you can actually get universal rock covers just to pop over the top of your filter, making your filter basically invisible. So now we've got our pond, we've got aeration, we've got filtration. The next thing we need to look is what have we got to put in the water to make sure that the fish are okay. So the first thing is WaterAger. I recommend using WaterAger under all circumstances, but if you do have the pond set up for an excess of a week, you don't technically need WaterAger because the chlorine and chloramine will dissipate over time. So I use it anyway because it has other benefits with increasing slime coat and other things. So considering a WaterAger is very important. And then when you're topping the pond up, you've got to use the WaterAger to take the chlorine out of the pond, and that is relative to the size of the top up. If you're doing 5 or 10%, you can definitely get away without it, but it's something to consider. The next thing is KH powder. Sydney tap water very regularly has a 0 KH, And carbonate hardness, carbonate is one bonds with calcium and forms calcium carbonate. It's a really essential element for the fish, and I'd suggest is probably the biggest killer of pet fish in Sydney at the moment, because we no longer have carbonate in our water, and just all your average people taking home a pet goldfish to put in their pond or put in their little aquarium, quite often the demise of the fish is caused due to a 0 kH level. So I'd highly recommend, before you buy your fish, either get yourself a kH test kit or go down to your local shop or come down and see us at Majestic Aquariums and we can check the kH for you. Because under most circumstances in Sydney, you'll find your pH is very high and your kH is basically 0, and it is an essential element. So I do recommend adding carbonate. If you've got a concrete pond, you'll find you don't need to, because it will leach carbonate out of the actual concrete. The other thing that I like to add to my pond too is just a little bit of salt, like a maximum of about 1 gram per 10 litres. And what the salt does is just really aid the fish's body slime, because the fish's body slime is its first defence against everything, and salt really helps to stimulate it, and any sorts of bacterial and so forth infection that the fish might actually get, the salt is just a really good way of controlling it. Another thing you might want to put into the water is a bit of good bacteria, because what the good bacteria does is the good bacteria goes in your filter, the good bacteria helps to break down the fish waste and keep the pond nice and healthy. And there are actually some really amazing new bacteria products which are available on the market now, which you put in the water and then the bacteria just comes alive and really competes with the algae to keep the water nice and clean. So a lot of those bacteria products are really worth having a good look at. But once again, if you do set up a garden pond, first thing is it's extremely easy. It's easy to install, it's easy to clean, and if it's not, the most important thing is to get yourself a good advisor. So I can be tracked down at any time at Majestic Aquariums, even if you just go onto the website, which is Majestic Aquariums, and just send a question. Maybe if you've got too much algae in your pond, or maybe you're not having success with your fish, then I guarantee you it's just a very, very basic thing that we can guide you through to make sure that you have the success with your pond that you deserve to. Another good way of learning too is that I have a YouTube channel. If you go to Majestic Aquariums TV on YouTube, I have a YouTube channel with about 2,500 videos. It's had like almost 3 million views, and it's just a really good information source. So if you just go to and it's in different sort of chapters as well, or if you just go to the search bar and write pond or koi or fish or whatever you want to write, it'll come up with literally hundreds of videos. So if there's any way that we can work with you or help you to get the pond and have the experience that you deserve, then just get in contact with us. Because once again, we do have a very large online store and we help people from all over Australia, and we're more than happy to help out. So make sure you check out our website, check out the YouTube channel, and then I'll be coming back in about another half an hour to do the next talk, which will progress from this one. So if anyone has any questions, either just sing out or come and see me after this, and then we'll start going through. Yes? About what, sorry?
Just around the pond area.
No, I think in the third seminar we talked quite a lot about lighting, but lighting is something that you really want to think about, because how you go about lighting your pond, it really determines what a feature it is at night time. So many people have got a pond that just is underutilised. So a very basic pond, adding some really effective lighting, having a good little water feature, and you'll transform that pond from being what's a very basic, unappealing a feature. You can turn that into a feature that just absolutely beckons for your attention. Absolutely, yeah. Some of the pond lighting now is you can get LED underwater lights, and what looks spectacular is get yourself a waterfall, and then you get one of these LED lights. They're only cheap these days, and you just position it in the water underneath the waterfall, so it shoots up into the waterfall. At night time, it just looks absolutely beautiful. So I think everyone with a fish pond should really look at the way it's lit, because lighting really makes it at night time. It makes it like a 24-hour feature instead of just a nice summer's day feature.